Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new day of content for National Children's Week. We are so excited to have you all with us today, and we have an awesome set of topics and an awesome set of panels that we'll be focusing on today and featuring today. Up first, we have a panel on education and how education funding specifically will be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. After that, we will have a panel on environmental racism and how that contributes to health issues in Black and Brown communities. And we'll finish up with a conversation with the leaders of our newest initiative, the Your Workers, My Family campaign. So please stay tuned for all that. We are very excited to bring this all with you today. We are going to start off with our education funding panel, as I said. Before we start, though, we had a few weeks ago, Giovanni Hernandez and Ed Navarro, two of the people who are on this panel, were on our podcast talking about education funding. And so please check that out. It's called Our Future Now, and it is on all the streaming platforms where you would normally get your podcasts. So please go check that out. Our Future Now. So without further ado, I give you this new panel.
Hi, I'm Bonta. I'm the CEO of Oakland Promise, with a vision to make sure that every person in Oakland, in the Oakland community, is able to thrive without barriers to opportunity. We're focused on ensuring that every child in Oakland, from cradle to career, has the ability to have educational opportunity and advancement. We're focused on economic mobility, and we provide an array of programs and services, including scholarship, including providing scholarships, provision of financial capability, programming, and supports to each and every school in the city of Oakland. And I'm happy to join you all this afternoon.
Thank you. And now we'll move to Ed.
Good afternoon. I'm Ed Navarro. I'm principal of Rincon Valley Middle School and Santa Rosa Accelerated Charter School in Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, California. I have been principal of both schools for the past 4 years. During that time, we've experienced Tubbs fire in 2017, burned my community down. The fire line was actually across the street from my school. So when we arrived back after the fire, the buildings that were directly across the street in the field were charred. I had 126 of my students lose their homes during that fire. And then it just seems to be disaster after disaster after that. After the Tubbs fire, then we had the smoke days from the Paradise Fire. We've had PSPS blackout days. Now we have coronavirus. So it's been a trying 4 years to get through the educational system, but we're surviving.
Thank you. And then Sumiya, we will go to you next.
Hi guys, I'm Sumiya Rahaman, and I'm a sophomore in Westminster High School, Maryland, and I'm an organizer from National Children's Campaign.
All right. Thank you to all our panelists for being here. We are happy to see you, and we will start moving into our first question. This question is a general question for all three panelists. We will go in the order of presentation. So first will be Bonta, Navarro, then Sumiya. So the first question is, the ongoing coronavirus pandemic has shown that our vital systems are not well equipped when it comes to education. A growing challenge for students has been the digital divide, which is an uneven distribution in access to use of, and important information and communication. This has become a challenge for students. How are you, respectively, each of your organizations or your schools, or you personally as a student, dealing with this issue? And then Arthur.
Thanks, Giovanni, for the question. So in Oakland, prior to COVID, we knew that over half of Oakland's students didn't have the ability to have a device that they could use for educational purposes. And they were also underconnected or had no connectivity. So the 2 points of access are, do I have a device and do I have connectivity? And when COVID hit, for sure, Oakland as a city moved into quick action to make sure to ensure that those two things could be the case for every single child, K-12 in the system. Oakland launched Oakland Undivided, which was a campaign that the mayor's office, City of Oakland, Oakland Public Ed Fund, Oakland Tech Exchange, and the OUSD launched together with Oakland Promise coming in as a partner after the founding of it to ensure that every child in Oakland would have a device, that every child in Oakland would have the connectivity that they need to be able to do that. We were able to, Oakland Undivided was able to raise $14 million to be able to support that vision. And we are kind of working in as a very close-knit community over these next days to make sure that that's a possibility, and have already been able to, Open Undivided has already been able to roll out the receipt of, I think, 14,000 devices through OUSD, which is incredible. And we also recognize that that's just the first wave of work that needs to be done. But the vision is that within a very short order, will ensure that every child has the ability to access education through the availably of a device and connectivity. I think the other thing that I appreciate that the superintendent, Kyla Johnson Trammell, has put first and foremost at the center is this concept that that in these days, in particular because of COVID, a device is a textbook. It is a material. It's an educational resource and an absolute essential piece of equipment that a student needs in order to be able to learn. And I think we have to lift up that kind of sensibility for the entire state of California.
Thank you very much. And that is thank you for that. And then we'll be moving on to Ed.
Yeah, so at my school, we are not a one-to-one device school, but we were pretty close to it. So when school shut down, we knew immediately we needed to get Chromebooks out, devices into the hands of our students. So we immediately formulated a plan to make that happen. We had a distribution day where we were able to distribute Chromebooks as well as hotspots, because some of our families, even though they had a Chromebook, if they didn't have a hotspot, it was useless to them. So we were able to distribute those. And in addition to that, my teachers, along with their online curriculum, were setting up office hours. So a student could log in and just ask, sometimes they were questions about curriculum, sometimes they were questions about how to use the digital platform. Just because we jumped into a digital school system didn't automatically mean that every student knew how to access that or be successful in it. So we had to create ways for teachers to be able to communicate that with our kids. And through the direction of our superintendent, Diane Kimura, we also created a tech hub at our district for parents, because a lot of our parents were not familiar with Chromebooks and how to use them. So we needed to be able to have an access point for a parent to reach out and contact and get their questions answered so that they could better help their students in the distance learning at home. So we tried to really roll out a full scale model at first, but again, knowing that it was a full scale phase one, where we're nowhere near where we'd like to be, but at least we were able to get devices into everyone's hands who needed them. And we were committed to doing so much so that now that the school year has ended, we did not collect Chromebooks or hotspots unless a student was leaving the district. We wanted to make sure that they had access in case any students were going to be accessing curriculum over the summer. And even if that's not the case, if we are going to be starting the next school year using distance learning, we didn't want to waste any time having to redistribute. We wanted to make sure that the devices were in the students' hands so we could just take off running on day one.
Wow, that's really, thank you for both of your responses. That's really good, and in the way you guys are helping the students. And Sumiya, for this question, feel free to adapt it. If you personally have had a struggle with the digital divide, or if someone you know, you can talk about that, and then feel free to give your response.
So basically, my school and my county, not everyone in our county has access to digital device. So like the way Mr. Ed Navarro school did it, we kind of like had our like devices being distributed to students who didn't have them. I know like my brother got like a bunch of like textbooks from school that was being distributed as well, and like packets to students that did not have Wi-Fi to their schools. And otherwise, other than that, I don't think we've had like major issues when it comes to online learning, because we had like most people in our county has Wi-Fi, and yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now we'll go into one of the specific oriented questions. This is a question from Bonta. So I'll just start the question right now, and after I finish it, you can feel free to just respond. So I'm a resident of Oakland, and it's no news that Oakland Unified School District has suffered large budget cuts through the years, which has resulted in the cutting of programs, potential closing of school sites. How has the Oakland Promise improved the lives of students and the greater community?
It is the case in Oakland that our school district has suffered from needing to make some very severe cuts. Now, as we're actually moving forward in the state of California, it's also the case that unfortunately there are likely going to be more cuts because of the overall deficit that the state of California is facing. I've heard in Oakland that could be upwards of an additional $40 million that need to be cut from the school's budgets. Those kinds of dollars not being available for students is devastating, for sure. I think Oakland Promise's response and what we've been focused on is ensuring that kind of regardless of the economic reality of our school system, that at the center of that, there are students who are thriving and who want to be able to pursue post-secondary opportunities and be focused on that. And so through our cradle to continuum approach, we're very much focused on ensuring that we can bring in additional resources to our students to make sure that they don't have a dream deferred around being able to go to college or pursue other post-secondary opportunities. And so Oakland Promise, through Brilliant Baby, for instance, our program that deals with our youngest children, has been able to ensure that over 655 since inception, Brilliant Babies, young children before they're 5 years old, have set up college savings accounts, which is wonderful. In our kindergarten to college program, we've ensured that over 20,000 Oakland elementary school students have the ability to have a $100 early college scholarship fund associated with them, so that they know that they're going to college and they know that they have resources to be able to do that. And we've also provided over 10,000 high school students with targeted college and career readiness supports. Over the course of the Oakland Promise, we've also released, even this year alone, $2.3 million in scholarships to graduating Oakland seniors to be able to go on to career technical education, community college, or a four-year college. And we have a specific focus on serving African American students, Latino students, and API students, so that we know that students who are most represented, and particularly in this moment, most impacted by the institutional racism that we have in this country, have the ability to have a clear pathway to be able to succeed. So we were very proud and humbled to be one small part of what the community has to offer in Oakland to support our students.
It is really incredible what the Oakland Promise is doing, and I really hope other regions and other places across the country will take a format of the Oakland Promise to help their communities. And thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
And the next question is for Ed. And feel free to follow up right as soon as I finish it. The pandemic has obviously changed our way of life. Natural disasters have been affecting your school even before this pandemic. As a principal, what challenges have you or your faculty faced while trying to provide quality education to your students?
Well, I think it just becomes, we can start systematically. We've had to change completely what the educational system looks like when it comes to these kinds of tragedies. And unfortunately, we've had some experience from our previous tragedies. So we were able to build upon that. But distance learning is a whole new beast. And we had, some who believe that you just do what you're doing in your classroom and you just transfer it over to a Zoom meeting and you're done. And what we're learning, through this process is that we've had a lot of hits and we've had some missteps. And now as we move forward into this upcoming year, those are the things that we need to look at. Like where were the areas that we were successful? And in what areas do we need to reevaluate what we've done and how can we make it better? And so I know that my staff is looking forward to the opportunity to do that. We want to provide a quality education. My teachers are committed to doing so. And sometimes that requires a lot of self-reflection. I don't want to have to redo everything that I've been doing for the last 25 years, but there's an understanding that I may have to. And teaching is different. And what has always worked before, I can't be the sage on the stage anymore. I need to make sure that I'm interacting and engaging my students in ways that I never had to do before. So it really is a systematic change on what does education look like through the digital platform. So really that's, for me, helping to guide my staff in doing so, helping to educate my parents on what that looks like. I've had to say many times during this pandemic, we're learning too. All of the leeway and the give that you're hoping that we give to your child as they're learning to do this distance learning, I'm going to ask that in return. Please give us some what works best for our kids, to understand that we will have missteps, but to give us an opportunity to work on those and improve our practice, just like we do, with our students. So it's been a big challenge to support my teachers, to support my parents, and ultimately, most importantly, to support my kids.
And thank you for everything you're doing as a principal. And I want to thank your staff and all your administrators, your teachers, your faculty for the work they're doing and trying to help the community out during these difficult times. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you.
And then Sumiya, here we have your question. All right, so just feel free to respond once I finish the question. All right, here we go. As a student, how has COVID-19 impacted your education? And how will the potential budget cuts impact your education in the near future?
Okay, so not a lot of, for impacting my education, we don't have a lot of live classes. So it barely gives students the time to ask questions or if they're having any trouble. And it was very new to everyone in our community because our community has always been in this safe bubble that no one was really concerned about it until the schools started closing and people were getting concerned over the systems. The grading system turned out to be a pass or fail. So I've seen a lot of students worrying about their grades and they couldn't improve it and their GPA. And I think the potential budget cuts is going to impact my education in the near future is because we've always like lived in having like the best in our community, and that's not going to be always the same. And I think like a lot of students are going to start realizing that we're not always going to have the best of like everything.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't imagine how difficult it is. As a student myself, I know these are challenging times, and I hope things get better for all of us in the aspects of education. All right. The next following questions are general, and if you could all respond in the same order that we've done them, that would be very much appreciated. Feel free to respond just as soon as I finish the question. So the next question is, students are the primary recipients of the services that organizations and schools provide. What needs do you still believe students need? Wait, let me fix that. Sorry, the font is very small. Students are the primary recipients of the services that organizations and schools provide. What needs do you believe still need to be met for students? And then we can start with Mia Bonta.
Mia, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted. Sorry about that.
There we go. Sorry. I think for youth serving organizations, one of the critical needs that we need to focus on for students is making sure that students are actually involved in generating our programming and helping to develop what we do. I think my lesson learned this year, more than ever, is that our students are in such a position of power, right? They are leading the way in this country and in this moment in particular. And I think what they need from us as adults and as organizations that support them is just the space to be able to show us the way and how they can benefit from the resources that we have to offer. So I plan personally to be doing a lot more listening and integrating the advice of our students into how we shape our programming moving forward.
Thank you. That's a really great response, and I can't wait to see how that'll look in Oakland. Next person, Ed. Feel free to respond.
Yeah, so what do our students need? I think that we've discovered that we need to be able to teach them how to be digital students. You know, that's a whole new avenue, and for some, they've never done that before. So, you know, it takes a kind of a commitment, a kind of dedication to be a student when you're not in the four walls of a class and, you know, it's not part of your regular routine. And we're finding that some students are being very successful at it. We're finding some are working their way through, and we're finding that some aren't being very successful at all. So it's not surprising. We never taught students how to be digital learners. You know, we just kind of assumed, oh, they're familiar with technology, so therefore they'll be able to be digital learners. And what we're finding is that's not necessarily the case. So how do we teach our students to access their education through an entirely different system? I think that's one of our needs. I think that we're really going to need some social, emotional support for our kids. You know, we have many families who have been impacted directly with COVID. Even if you're not, you know, directly affected by it, there's fear. I mean, we're living in a fearful society right now, and that's traumatic. You know, if you're a 12, 13-year-old kid and everyone is afraid around you for many, many different reasons, I think we're going to see some trauma. And I want to make sure that we have support for our kids when they come back and an understanding of what they've gone through. So I think social emotional is really, really big. I'm also concerned about the social emotional well-being of my faculty. You know, we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of our kids. And, you know, as teachers, as educators, we're givers. We don't like to take care of ourselves. We like to take care of others. And sometimes I find that I see my teachers and their tanks are empty. And I think you need to take care of yourself. Put your oxygen mask on first so that you can take care of our kids. And that's going to be learned. We have to make sure that we give our teachers the ability to do that and the time to do that and encourage them to do that so that we can continue to be successful.
Thank you for bringing up those points about teachers needing the emotional support. I think that's a topic that a lot of times isn't discussed
Right.
in the community, and I think that's very important. We should all start a conversation regarding that. And our next, Sumiya, feel free to respond.
So I think like in my community personally that like a communication between students and teachers is needed because like I've noticed that a lot of teachers like just give us the work and we kind of do it and turn it in, but like we really need the communication in our community. And I believe that schools like we have to like turn in our stuff, but like some of the students are not able to do that by mail or and I think that we need to do a better job of like distributing more devices.
Thank you for that. Your perspective as a student is important in these conversations. Okay, we're gonna move on to one of the last two questions.
Giovanni, do we need to end this meeting and maybe start a new one? Because it looks like our time is about to expire and I would hate for us not to be able to finish.
Does it say, because it does not notify me on time here?
I just saw some kind of pop-up.
I think it's fine. It says this meeting has been upgraded by the host and now includes unlimited minutes.
Perfect,
Yes,
thank you.
that was the one I got. I was hoping for it. If not, I was about
Okay,
to panic. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, we have.
I apologize.
No problem. I was about to raise that concern too. So this question, Ed, you're familiar with this question, is what will you tell federal and state officials to do regarding funding? So I'll read it and then feel free to tell. This is a message to the people in charge, the leaders in our state governments or federal governments, what you want to see from them, what actions. So we'll go in the same order from me to Ed to Sumiya. And feel free to respond once I finish. The question is, what should state and federal officials be doing to ensure funding and ensure quality education for students?
So I think that at the federal level, we are going to be entirely dependent on making sure that they do the moral thing and the right thing and invest in our education. I am very hopeful that that the federal government will pass the HOPE Act to ensure that we have additional investments in education in our youth in particular. I think at the state level, it's the same request for sure. I think in a more targeted way, I'm hoping that the state will ensure that they are investing in providing some of the operational support that's required to be able to, in this moment of COVID, ensure that we have the resources to be able to do it. I think schools are presented with a nearly insurmountable challenge. I think, but for the brilliance and creativity of our educators, we'll be able to do it. But at a time when we need more protective gear, more ability to keep ourselves healthy and safe, where, as Mr. Navarro said, our teachers are being asked to learn a new way of teaching. Our students are being asked to engage in a new way of learning, that we really need to be able to double down our investment in education and specifically provide resources that will allow us to be able to innovate and meet the moment that's required of us because of COVID. And I think we need to have state champions. We certainly have one in our superintendent of schools, Tony Thurmond, and in many legislators, and I think even in the governor. But this is a time to invest and not cut in providing resources to our local school systems and to our youth. So I'm hoping that they will meet that challenge as we are meeting ours.
Thank you for that response. It's really moving, and I hope our elected officials do listen. And Ed, same question to you.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on what Mia said, that I agree wholeheartedly. Like, I feel like the first thing that we need is acknowledgement. We need to acknowledge that we are different. We are a school, And my fear is that we're getting lumped into business, and as businesses reopen, you know, we're being expected to follow those same models, and we just can't. You know, if I'm a restaurant, I can limit how many students come in. I can ask for reservations. I can't do that at a school. I'm a public school. My doors are open to all kids, and you can't expect me to run it like a business. So to make a school work with as many kids as we have and the capacity, the space capacity that we have, we're going to need those kinds of devices. We need those protective shields. We're going to need to be able to figure out how do we do social distancing. Now, I've been in middle school for a lot of years, and I know that the second I open my doors and I have hundreds of middle schoolers with the ability to walk into a hallway, I'm not going to be able to be monitoring them and say 6 feet apart, stay away. You know, these kids haven't seen each other in a very long time, and they're very social. And we have to acknowledge that the second they're together, we're not going to be able to maintain that social distancing. They're going to run up, they're going to hug each other, they're going to be super excited to see each other. And that's our reality. So I would like some acknowledgement of that. Who are we dealing with? What are the needs that we're going to have to make sure that that happens? And funding, please fund us. You know, we talk about our kids as being our number one priority. Now it's time to put your money where your mouth is. We need to be able to support our kids' needs because they're the future. And if we can't invest in our future, then there's nothing else to invest in.
I completely agree. If we want to say young people are the future, it's time to invest in them properly.
That's right.
Thank you, Ed. And then Sumiya, your response.
So I think like as soon as like COVID-19, like businesses and everything is opening up, like Ed said, there's always been a rise in like the cases. I think like the states should like more like monitor this, and like I feel like the schools need to be closed and not like open to everyone, because then everyone's gonna start like going in, like Ed said, and like the cases will rise if that happens among kids. I think like the states should have add more funding to the schools and put like education as a priority instead of cutting the funds. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And I hope every state follows that example, and I hope the federal government does that as well. And
I'd like to add that I understand budgets, and I understand that there's less money coming in because of this, and the economy is affecting it. I understand that. But we still have to prioritize what's important. And we have, you know, it's tough to balance a budget. I get it. I have to do it at home. You know, I understand that. But we have to really put our money where our mouth is.
I agree. Thank you for adding that part. And then we will be moving into our final question. This was added mostly for encouragement. I know all of you have families, you're part of the community, and I wanted to take this time for you to offer words of encouragement to your community or to the people watching this. So I'll read the question, and whatever you feel comes out of your heart, whatever you want to say to the person watching this, whether it be your family or anyone else. And then we'll go in the order from Mia to Ed and then to Sumiya. And then I'll get started, and Mia, you can feel free to respond. What advice could you give students, parents, and community leaders about distance learning, facing potential budget cuts, and all this in the growing pandemic?
I think during the time of this pandemic, what I would offer to students and parents and our educators is to hold steady and have some grace. I think everyone is learning a new way of being, and it takes and it'll take a while. So just make sure that we're offering ourselves some grace as we're learning together in this moment. I think more importantly is that to also recognize that during a pandemic, and we're in the middle of several, right? We're in the middle of a health pandemic, and then we're in the middle of a pandemic of racism, that we need to make sure to be bold and really think about the way that this country can change how we are supporting our students, particularly our Black students, particularly our students of color. Um, and this is our time. Like, if we can do it now, I don't know when we can. Like, when we'll be able to. So now is our moment. We must act. We must kind of fight through the fear that we have in this moment, and if we are able to do that, we will be stronger for it. So hold fast.
I completely agree. Thank you for those words of encouragement. Ed, same question to you.
My words are for my students. You know, I want them to commit to an education, and it's hard, and I know that it's difficult, and I know that it's different, but the outcome is worth it. Like, I want them to understand that I understand that this is really hard, and it's not the way it's always been, and change is difficult. I get it, but it's worth it. Hang in there, work harder, give it your all, ask for help, and we'll get through it. And for the parents, same thing. You know, I recognize that we are in different times, and it doesn't look like school looked when you went to school. It didn't look that way before the pandemic. Now it looks even less like it did when you were in school. Embrace that. Don't be afraid of it. Let's figure it out. Let's make it work. And again, like I said earlier, we're investing in our kids. And investments aren't always easy. They're often difficult, but it's gonna be worth it. It will pay off. So those are my words of encouragement. Like, we can't give up. We can't. Right now, it's a time to persevere.
Thank you so much. Those words are extremely encouraging, especially for me to hear, and I know your students will be encouraged by them so much. And then our last panelist, Sumiya.
I think like right now, like patience is the key to like everything, whether it's from community leaders to parents to students. Like, everyone needs to be patient and like work through this like together. And like students should stay true to themselves and be honest with their educations. And like the parents should not be like getting mad at the teachers for like um malfunctions or anything that's going on that's not okay. And the community leaders should always like lead the students and the parents through this by being a voice to everyone.
I want to thank you all for your response on this and for being members of the panel. I want to give you special thanks. Ed, the resiliency your community has shown, your students have shown, is truly inspiring. And I hope other students can continue to be motivated through these difficult times. Sumiya, as a student, I feel how difficult this is. This pandemic is truly changing. It is really testing our education system. It's testing teachers, students, faculty. And I hope you can continue to feel safe, secure, and that your education, that there are people working at their best. Mia, I want to thank you for everything the Oakland Promise is doing to step up where sometimes government has failed to fund. And I want to thank you for all the work you're doing. And if there's any last things you want to say for the recording, or if there's any questions you have, now would be the time to mention them.
I would just like to thank you, Giovanni, for bringing us together and for setting a table and holding a conversation that is sorely needed, and for your leadership as a person in Oakland and as a student that cares deeply about other students and in our youth, and for being a beacon and a role model for the rest of us to follow. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like to add, for anybody who's questioning whether our youth are a worthy investment, I'd like them to look at Giovanni and Sumiya and say, look, yes, our investment in our kids is worth it. They're leading the way, and we're very proud of you. So thank you for the work that you're both doing.
Thank you so much.
I would like to say, like, thanks Giovanni for having me, and I'm really getting this is also like an educational time for me because I'm getting perspectives from principal, and Mia, you're adding like some great perspectives too. So I'm really getting like education on like what is actually going on about everything. So thank you guys too.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have had this panel and all of you be members from your representative organizations, from your schools, a youth perspective, especially Sumiya. And I really appreciate you having the time. I know it's difficult right now. Everyone has families, everyone has other things to attend. And I'm very thankful for you making time for this. And I can't wait to see how people will react to this. I hope it's in a good way, and I hope you can continue doing the good fight, the good work on behalf of not just us, but your faculty, the other people you represent, the communities you all have invested your time into. And thank you very much for all of that.
And thank you, Giovanni.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That was a great way to start the day. What an awesome panel. Great job by Giovanni for leading that, our amazing NCC organizer and one of the amazing young people who keep our entire team moving and have made this entire week possible. We're so thankful to him and the other NCC organizers, as well as Mia, Ed, and Sumiya for being on that panel. Up next, we have a panel on environmental racism and how that impacts our health system with Natalie Mebane, our Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs, Diana Fernandez, the moderator, and one of our NCC youth organizers, Mustafa Santiago Ali, who is a great environmental justice activist and former official at the EPA, and Kevin J. Patel, an environmental justice activist and the founder of One Up Action. I wanted to direct everyone really quick to the last event of the day, which is our Your Workers, My Family conversation featuring the two founders, Victory and Yolian, and the communications lead, Caroline. So Your Workers, My Family was started after Victory and Yolian connected about their parents' struggles as essential workers and not getting the protections that they needed. And so they came to us with this idea for a new organization. And so we brought them under the National Children's Campaign umbrella and were able to provide them with the resources that they needed to lead on this. And so if you check out this panel in just a few minutes, you'll really be able to see just how amazing they are and the amazing work they're doing. And so, yeah, we're going to now hop right into the environmental justice, environmental racism, and health panel. So if you'll bear with us for 1 second while we get that on the screen, and then it'll be Mustafa, Diana, Kevin, and Natalie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Fernandez. I am an organizer with the National Children's Campaign from Miami, Florida. And today I'm joined by 3 distinguished panelists to discuss the topic of environmental justice and racism and how the environmental movement is fighting for social justice. So today I'm joined by Natalie Mebane, the co-founder and vice president of government relations and public policy for the National Children's Campaign.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
And Mustafa Santiago Ali, which is the Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization for the National Wildlife Federation.
Thank you for having me.
And Kevin J. Patel, Founder and Executive Director for One Up Action.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
So thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you today. And I know all of you have had a long history of advocating for environmental justice and have even devoted your lives to fighting for it. So I want to ask you all, what exactly inspired each of you to join this movement? Natalie, do you want to start us
Oh,
off?
sure. I guess I'll go. Thank you. For me, I think for me, it started off when I was around your age, Diana, when I was a teenager, and that I saw that everything that I really cared about in terms of whether it was a social justice issue, an environmental issue, that I realized they were actually the same thing. And I think that's when I came to realization pretty much senior year of high school that this field of environmental science, environmental policy wasn't something that was just about the science part of it. It was about the impacts on our daily lives. And so from that moment on, when I kind of made that connection that if you don't have clean air, you don't have clean water, then your quality of life is really non-existent. And that there were, billions of people around the world who have neither. And I think that's what really made me realize that this was something that I couldn't ignore, and that regardless of what my circumstances were, always having access to those things, those basic necessities, there were always going to be people in this world that didn't. And even though I love nature, I love forests, I love animals, all those other things, I realized that in overall, I really wanted to focus on people and making sure that people had the basics and making sure that people had everything that they needed to really strive.
How about you, Kevin? What inspired you to join the movement?
Yeah, it's not more of inspiration, but it's more of a survival technique. I'm an activist because in my community of South Central Los Angeles, it's survival. It's a way that our community really has a voice to talk about what is happening in our community, like environmental racism and the air pollution and smog pollution that's affecting not just me, but many of my community members. So, when I was in middle school, first semester, I really started on food inequality and teaching students about where food comes from, on non-GMOs and organics and vegan foods, and that's where I really got started 8 years ago. This is 8 years ago, so I'm talking about 8 years ago in middle school. But when it came around second semester, I was affected by heart palpitations, and I now have to live with irregular heartbeat for the rest of my life. But that moment really showed me that it's not just me that's being affected by heart palpitations, but there are other members in my community that are being affected by other heart issues, by cancer, because of the fossil fuel industry, and just because LA is very air polluted and smog polluted. And so it's not the rich and affluent community members that are being affected by these issues. It's those that are living in the low income marginalized communities that are being affected by these issues. And so that is what really drives me to do this work, is making sure that, we don't have these issues happening to our communities, and that we have a chance to really combat this crisis, and so that we are living equitably and we're living with justice, right? That's the word. But yeah, that's what really is driving me, and what inspires me to continue is that this is survival for many people in my community.
How about you, Mustafa? What inspired you to join the movement?
I was raised in a family that was focused on workers' rights and civil rights. And I remember my father going out and being on the strike lines, and, as a young person, watching that. And then I started working on social justice issues when I was 16. And I remember also about the time that I was beginning to really get into social justice, that I realized that we also had a lot of folks in the community that I had grown up in who were getting cancer. We literally had a cancer cluster, and there was an old coal-fired power plant that was right across the river. And I didn't have answers, at that time. I was searching and trying to figure out what was going on. And then, as I was going a little bit further down the road, I started getting sort of adopted by folks in the civil rights movement and in the early environmental justice movement. And everything began to come together for me at that time. about, all the folks who are dying in my community and also around the country, and the commonalities that I was seeing happening, whether in Black and Brown communities or Indigenous communities. So that was my introduction at that time in the early days to environmental equity, environmental justice, and environmental racism.
Okay, thank you all so much for sharing your story. And Kevin, I know you mentioned the word justice, which is environmental justice is a concept that was talked about a lot. So for the entire panel, I want to ask, what does environmental justice mean to you? But if you would like, Kevin, you can start us off.
Yeah, definitely. You know what justice means to me? I really want to start where in my perspective, in my community, South Central Los Angeles, the people responsible for what is happening in the climate crisis are not those that are marginalized. It's not those of Black, Indigenous, people of color. It is those that are affluent, that have the money, the fossil fuel industries, the corporations, because of their greed, right? And we like to say that, the climate crisis was started by colonialism and by racism and by discrimination and by all these other systems of oppression. And that's definitely right. And so what environmental justice for me means, that we get rid of these systems completely, and that we have justice for our people so that we can live in the same sense of having a livable future and making sure that our neighbors and our brothers and sisters don't get, all these deadly diseases and heart palpitations, or even heart issues, or any cancer, any health defects or anything like that. So definitely justice for me is making sure that my community is safe, that it's a safe place for all, and that there's a fair and just transition for everyone when we do change into the new systems.
Absolutely. I agree completely. That was great, Kevin. Thank you so much. And I know, Mustafa, you have been working with environmental issues for a very long time, and you've devoted your entire life to it. So what exactly does environmental justice mean to you?
Yeah, so we should really unpack that. So environmental injustice, environmental racism speaks to the fact that people place in our communities everything that they don't want. Everything from coal-fired power plants to petrochemical facilities to, dilapidated housing that has lead in the pipes and also in the paint on the walls, the waste treatment facilities. So everything they don't want is placed in our communities. And for me, environmental justice speaks to us moving our communities from surviving to thriving, helping our communities to have power again, to have their voice actually make sure that the injustices of the past are not a part of the future.
Yeah, amazing. Surviving to thriving. I'm going to use that line again. But Natalie, how about you? Through your work with National Children's Campaign and Zero Hour, you have done a lot of work on environmental justice. And I know that it means a lot to you. So if you could unpack what it means to you, that would be great.
Definitely. To me, environmental justice is essentially nobody suffers disproportionate impacts based on where they were born, where they grew up. I think that we have this dirty fossil fuel economy that we have accepted the impacts of, the externalities of, except we don't accept it for every community. We accept it, and we accept the pollution and the death and the cancer and the asthma that comes from it, but we accept it for certain communities that are considered expendable, communities that have been marginalized from the very beginning. And I think that, to me, environmental justice is that we all take on the impacts and accept the fact that if we want to live in a world where fossil fuels are still a thing, then we are all going to have to live with the consequences. And the reason why fossil fuels in general are still used, even though we have alternatives, we have clean energy that could replace it, is because we have places and people that we do not care about. We have people that are pushed to the side, who are told that it's okay if we put this coal-fired power plant in your neighborhood, or a gas plant, or mining of coal, or drilling for gas, fracking, anything you can think of, petrochemicals, in order to essentially serve the world, but they are served as a sacrifice. And I think to me, environmental justice means that there are no more places that are considered a sacrifice for our modern day living. It doesn't mean that we give up our modern day economy. It means that we actually move with the force that we know we can in order to transition justly to a clean energy economy. And until that we make essentially that decision as a country and as a world, that there is no place or person that is expendable, we will continue to face these same impacts, except we're not all going to face them equally. And so to me, environmental justice is all of us actually experiencing the world as it is, rather than some folks are secluded from the impacts of our fossil fuel world and others are completely trapped in it.
Great, thank you so much, Natalie. And I know most of you, if not all of you, have sort of mentioned environmental injustice in some way in your answers. And I know a lot of you mentioned it, how it impacted your community and how it impacted your health. So I think that it's important to shed some light on exactly how environmental injustice affects people's health in these communities. So Mustafa, I know you mentioned it in your answer as well. So could you shed some light on that topic maybe?
Sure. I mean, environmental injustice plays out in so many different ways. It plays out in Flint, Michigan, you know, when we have babies and young people who are being impacted by lead that follows them throughout their lives because of the neurological, you know, disorders that come from that exposure, and the 3,000 locations across the country that have higher levels of lead in their water than Flint does. And we know the tragedy that was in that space. Environmental injustice plays itself out in places like the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, a hardworking Latinx community that when you go there and you take a breath of air, you feel like you're breathing in gasoline fumes. When you go to school at Cesar Chavez High School and you look in the background and you see these giant plants and the flaring that continues to go on, and we ask our young people to be able to learn, that is an environmental injustice. Or when you're in Port Arthur, Texas, and when you breathe in that community, a hardworking African-American community, you know, you literally can't take a breath of air because your lungs are on fire and your eyes are tearing up because of all the pollution that continues to be pumped into your lungs on a daily basis. It's like the 48217 in Detroit, where kids, when they look out the window, they don't get a chance to see trees. What they see are these facilities that are surrounding them, and that they know that they hardly can ever escape it, and the change that they're asking for inside of their communities. It's like Princeville, North Carolina, a place founded by freed slaves, and major hurricanes continue to come and smash this community time and time again because of the choices that others have made. These are just a few of the examples of environmental injustice that we can actually change if we're willing to make the change and make the right priorities set to actually protect the lives of communities of color and lower wealth communities and indigenous brothers and sisters.
Yeah, wow, that was great. I know that you mentioned a lot about marginalized communities, and I think that that plays a really big role in environmental injustice and how it plays out in communities of color. So I mean, I can speak from my own personal experience and where I live, which is that in the community that I live in Florida, it's predominantly Hispanic, and my county, specifically Miami-Dade County, has had like the most cases of coronavirus in Florida completely. And that's probably related to the people that live in my community. And I know not too long ago when this coronavirus pandemic began, the US Surgeon General mentioned something about how Black and Brown communities are the ones that have the most coronavirus cases because they need to step up and avoid alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. But it's not really fair to mention something like that when you aren't even addressing the fact that systemic racism is what actually plays a part in how people's health is affected in these communities of color. So I think it's really important to point out that the reason that so many of these communities that you mentioned, Mustafa, are dealing with these issues is not only because of it's not only because of things that they can control, it's factors that they can't control that is forced on them by society. And I know that Kevin, you were also mentioning this earlier, and you were mentioning your community and your own personal health. So I think that you could also shed some light on how it's impacted you and how environmental injustice and factors that are out of your control, but that people should still play a role in trying to change, and how you can get involved in doing that.
Definitely. Diana, you bring up a great point. It's not, these are factors that we can't control, right? I want to give some statistics on like just how bad it is for people in America, people of color, Black, brown, Indigenous brothers and sisters in America. 55% of those who live within 3 kilometers of hazardous waste facilities are people of color. 47% of people who are who live critically close to hazardous chemical facilities are Black or brown or even Latinos. Black people are exposed to 50% more air pollution than white people. Communities with more people of color are 40% more likely to have unlawfully unsafe drinking water, like Mustafa said in Flint, Michigan. But Diana, I want to go back to your point of like the factors. Racial discrimination is in policy making. So when these when politicians are making these laws and when they're making these motions, they don't equate for the people that are going to be affected the most by this crisis, right? And so that is a factor in the reason why our communities are being affected the most by these crises. I could tell you that this year has really shown just how bad our current system is. And I want to bring it back to systems because that's really what is causing this crisis and why our people are being affected the most by the climate crisis. And just how bad, how bad this system doesn't work for our people, for the Black and brown Indigenous peoples and people of color and all these other marginalized communities. I'm not even talking, there's many more marginalized communities that this system does not work for. And definitely that is the reason why we must, in order to really act on, having, and that's all environmental injustices that I'm talking about. But in order to really have environmental justice is that we have to really fix the wrongs that our, that our government officials and our lawmakers have been doing for the past, hundreds and hundreds of years. So definitely we need to start making policies like the Green New Deal and, laws and implement laws that includes every single one, and doesn't leave anyone out. And I think that's the way that we have to go in a new direction that we must take, just because the coronavirus has shown us that, our communities are being affected the most by this crisis.
Yeah, I agree. We have to go in a different direction if we want to fix a broken system, and I know that the question that was asked earlier, how exactly does environmental injustice affects people's health? And you shed some light on how people were affected because of the coronavirus. And Natalie, do you have any insights on how, in other ways that it's affected people's health?
Yeah, I'm really happy you mentioned coronavirus, Kevin, because as we've seen, racism in general is compounded by everything else. And so even with the onslaught of this pandemic, which has, changed this entire world, it has affected us differently. There are communities that are predominantly Black communities, Latino communities, Indigenous communities that are most impacted. And that's from a lot of factors. A lot of factors are from exposure levels overall, because if you think about essential workers and what that means, essential workers are the people that are keeping the economy running, keeping everything open, and they can't safely work from home. They can't decide that today isn't a good day to go in, right? We wouldn't, the economy of the world would stop. And so overall, they're going to be exposed at significantly higher levels simply from the jobs. And that shows you already the class division when it comes to wealth in this country. And so you already have people who are predominantly Black, Latino, Indigenous being exposed at higher rates, so that if you're more likely to catch it because you're a service, within a service industry or something that we cannot live without, then if you do catch it, then what happens next? You already have the disparities in healthcare and the fact of access to healthcare in our country, as we all know, We do not have universal health care. We do not have a government provided system. We have this private for-profit industry that is designed to make billions of dollars at the expense of people's health. And so you have people already who have less access to even care and who don't have sick leave. So if they are feeling ill and they know they're sick, they still have to go in because they can't afford to miss a day of work, which then spreads it even further. And when you combine all those things with, income inequality and overall lack of care, and also just direct racism in the healthcare industry experienced by majority, Black populations, you have this sort of perfect storm of people being exposed more, not treated, and more likely to live in communities that have already been damaged by the fossil fuel industry. Asthma Alley, which is the district that is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district, she has the area called Asthma Alley, which has significantly higher rates of asthma as well as hospitalizations for asthma. From the Guardian article, it was saying that essentially has a hospitalization rate of 8 times higher for asthma than the rest of the country, and 21 times higher than rates just in other New York City neighborhoods. And so when you could put all that, your lungs are more likely to not be able to survive the impacts of coronavirus when they've already been damaged for decades from air pollution. And so when you put the perfect storm almost of socially isolated neighborhoods in terms of being neglected for decades, putting the industry in those communities because you feel that they're the least resistance in terms of making sure that you can get your polluted industries put somewhere, then you have people's lungs that are already damaged from having years of air pollution. And then they're more likely to catch it because they're already in a particular class that is more likely to be exposed. And then if they're exposed and they catch it, lack of health care, you see people dying at a much higher rate. And so environmental racism kills. It actually kills. And it takes, millions of lives when you count them up over the years. And they're not recorded as deaths by environmental racism. They're just considered natural causes, but none of it was natural. It was always intentional.
Yeah, Natalie, you mentioned inequality and essential workers, and I think that I can also shed some light on how that's affected me as well, because my dad is actually an essential worker, as my brother as well. But my dad works 2 jobs, and his full-time job is at a water plant for the city, for the government. And not too long ago, probably a few months ago, in 2019, he was hospitalized, and I know that his job and the time he spent in that environment affected his health quite a bit, and it affected how long he was hospitalized for, and affected how much money we had to pay, and how much that put us in debt, and because of that issue. So I know that I've had experiences in which I've realized the inequality that people, not only my family, but people in my community experience, because my family probably doesn't even have it the worst. I have friends and relatives that have actually gotten the coronavirus here in my own community, and weren't they didn't have the proper care, the proper access to healthcare to actually treat it, and they almost died because of it. It's literally killing people. And it's really scary to think how our society puts people in communities of color and in low income communities at a disadvantage. So it's great that you mentioned that, and you mentioned the inequality that people are facing. But I think it's also important to realize that while most of these issues are brought on by structural, systemic racism and things that have happened in the past and systems of oppression, it's also important to realize that things that we do matter, and things that we do can change that and can affect that. So I know that all of you are amazing activists and are working to protect your own community and protect many others. So I'd like to ask all of you, what structural changes can we make in our communities or that need to be made in our communities to address the issue of environmental racism?
I'll get started. I think the reality, we have to really look at this. The reality is that the significant impacts of the climate crisis on vulnerable communities are still happening because of the inequalities that Natalie had mentioned, and because of the environmental injustice, because of environmental racism, and because of racism and discrimination, all these other factors and the systems of oppression. And so I just really think that the structural changes that need to be made are with laws and motions, and really demanding of our leaders and government officials to really implement changes like the Green New Deal, and making sure that there's a just transition for workers, and making sure that there is any, equality for all, and making sure that our communities are able to live, in a place that is, in the same sense, home where we're not plagued by air pollution and smog pollution. We're not plagued by the fast food industry, And so I think that is one of the things that we really need a demand of structural change, if we can implement these policies, implement these laws, and really demand of our leaders to make that change.
Thank you, Kevin. I also wanted to ask Mustafa, who has also been working on these same topics throughout his life. What structural changes can we make to address the issue of environmental racism in our communities?
Well, someone who was around long before we were all born, Dr. King said that I can't pass legislation to make you love me, but I can pass legislation to stop you from lynching me. And in today's time, we know that many of our communities are figuratively and literally being lynched by the decisions that have been made, by the policies that have been put in place. So we start with making sure that our communities are no longer allowed to be the dumping grounds, and we create legislation that specifically addresses that. Natalie had also mentioned the fact, we got 80 million people in our country who are uninsured and underinsured, and we got 20 million people who are living in possession deserts. So we make sure that everybody actually has access to health care, and we make sure that the doctors that are necessary are in place, but that those doctors have that bias training to make sure that Black and Brown and Indigenous folks are given the proper types of treatment that are necessary. We also make sure that we have legislation that deals with the food desert issue and the food insecurity that exists inside of our communities, 23 million people who are dealing with that situation. And if we want to make sure we're doing it right, all we really have to do for our federal and state legislators is make sure that there is an environmental justice analysis for all of the major bills that are coming through, so that way that we address any of the disparities, but also focus on the sets of opportunities that are necessary to make our communities whole.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that there are also a lot of changes that we can make. And I know that Natalie, as an adult mentor to many youth climate organizations, maybe you can also shed some light on what we can do to fix this issue.
I think it's great that you mentioned what are the, essentially the structural changes that we need, because that's really what it is. It's structural. I mean, as I mentioned before, and I said racism kills, that's more than just the environment. It's in racism period in this country. I mean, we see everything that's happening right now with the rebellion in the streets of people protesting police murder. It shows you right there on camera that racism literally kills. And whether you're fighting structural racism when it comes to police violence, which by over policing Black and Brown communities, and the fact that they are considered, as I mentioned, expendable anyway, or whether you're talking about racism killing because of pollution that's allowed to be there. There is that overlap. The same communities that are faced with the worst pollution are also faced with the most over policing and the most encounters with police as a result, and the most targeted police encounters, as well as facing with the worst healthcare. So I would say our first structural changes that we need is we have to decide as a country what we really think of racism. And is this something that we actually want to stop? Because it is in our power. As Mustafa said, you can't legislate essentially hate. You can't legislate it. You can still have hate in your heart, but we can legislate lynchings. We can legislate whether there's lynchings on our streets from those in power who are supposed to protect us, and we can prosecute and enforce laws equally, evenly in all communities, rather than some people are above the law, some folks aren't. And so I think for me, in terms of the structural changes, we have to first also decide: do we want a world where people die of pollution? Do we want a world because of that people die of climate change? And the impacts of climate change is just a culmination of oppression for hundreds of years, all coming to a head to literally destroy our world. And if you think about that, we have to just decide as a society: do we want a world that can survive, and do we want a world that runs whether it's on clean energy so that people aren't dying of pollution? And even if we had a perfect sustainable world environmentally, if we had the perfect we stopped climate change and all of that, we could still have hate, and we could still have racism in general, which would still kill people. And so I think that, as Mustafa said, he was quoting Dr. King, you may not be able to change what person's thinking or feeling, but you can at least legislate what they do and have those policies in place that are applied. If people knew that there were actual consequences to things like that, like related to crimes of police, then people might think twice, a police officer, before they make a decision to end someone's life. And so I think that's the best thing, is that we actually have to change our laws and change our systems already that are perpetuating the ability for people to be above the law. And that includes fossil fuel companies, which also behave like they're above the law.
I agree. And I think that you mentioned policing, and I think that it's very important to realize that if we want to actually make structural change happen, that we also need to invest in our communities and invest in communities of color, which are the ones that are most affected by environmental issues and that are most affected by racism in general as a whole. And it affects many lives in America. So I think that I agree that one of the many things that we need to do is invest in our communities. And I know that we should be wrapping things up. And one of the last questions that I want to ask you guys is, what would be your advice to youth everywhere, nationwide, or adults even, hoping to get involved in the climate movement, but that don't really know where to start? So this question is for all of you, but Kevin, if you can start us off and tell us how youth specifically can get involved in the climate crisis and the climate movement.
Definitely. I really just want to start off with saying what Natalie left off with is, and Mustafa also mentioned within his questions, answers. Invest in your community. I think that's one of the things, is investing in your community is the first chance. If you can really have your voice heard and making sure that you're demanding of your politicians and your government officials and saying, hey, this is wrong. I see that this is an injustice to my community and I want to do something about it. Please do, because that's going to make the change, right? We can all start with investing in our communities and making sure that our communities don't go through these injustices and environmental racism. But specifically for all the young people out there, there are many young youth organizations that are wonderful and doing amazing work to stop this, inequalities, the systems of oppression. And I just want to mention, Diana, you're wearing the zero. This is 0 Hour shirt. Amazing organization that is doing amazing work to stop the systems of oppression. And I definitely work with One Up Action, being the founder and executive director of One Up Action, who that does individual actions, basically making sure that young people can really get involved and get the resources in order to really take direct action. Because as marginalized young people, we don't really get the resources to do like beach cleanups, tree plantings, and such. But find an organization that you like or you are interested in, and just get involved. Reach out to them, and definitely all these organizations are welcoming. I mentioned This Is 0 Hour, I mentioned One Up Action, but there are many more: Earth Guardians, Earth Uprising, just many more. U.S. Youth Climate Strike that strikes. But yeah, there are many organizations that are wonderful.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I am so proud to say that I'm fighting alongside youth activists like you. You are doing such an amazing job and an inspiration to youth everywhere, may I say.
Thank you. And I just want to mention National Children's Campaign. That, I'm sorry, I forgot that was one of the main organizations I wanted to mention, but I slipped my mind. But yeah, National Children's Campaign I've been working alongside with them, and they just oh my God, the phenomenal work that they have been doing. Natalie and Diana and Jonah and Kimberly and all the amazing people that are part of National Children's Campaign. I love you guys, and you guys are doing amazing work.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I also want to ask Mustafa, what would be your advice to people looking to get involved, youth, adults, anyone who wants to get involved with the movement?
Well, first, I would say make sure you're checking out your local environmental justice organizations who have been doing the work for decades, or the networks that many frontline communities have. And then, of course, I'm going to call out This Is Zero Hour because I've always loved the work that you guys have done. The National Children's Campaign, 1 million of us, young environmental artists is another really great organization that's out there. You know, you just have to figure out what your flavor is and get in where you fit in, but make sure that you're doing it in an authentic way.
That is great advice to everyone. Thank you, Mustafa, for being here and for sharing your insight with all of us. You are doing amazing work and you are an inspiration as well. And I also want to ask Natalie, who works with these youth organizations, National Children's Campaign and Zero Hour, if you could also mention how people can get involved.
Definitely. Well, one thing you can definitely check nationalchildrenscampaign.org to find out more about how to join us and how to work with us. We work with youth across the country. We are an intergenerational organization of youth and adults working to prioritize 74 million children in this country. And so we want to make sure that we grow our team, grow our work. And so there's a place for everyone who wants to take part. And overall, I would say just making sure that you find the issues that you care about. At National Children's Campaign, we work on everything from health, education, LGBTQ rights, environment, climate, gun safety, everything in between. Because we know that all these issues are intersectional. They are not living in their own world. They all affect each other, and they are all responsible for our health, for our lives, and for our overall happiness. And so at National Children's Campaign, we do work to fight for all of these issues simultaneously, because none of us get to separate what affects us, as gun violence affects us as much as climate change, as much as healthcare, as much as education. And so those are all the ways that you can take part. Also, we have launched our Vote for Our Future campaign, which is a joint campaign with Zero Hour, which is vote and then the number 4, like the number for our future. So votefourOurfuture.org, where you can also find out more how to get involved with our campaign to mobilize youth across America to vote in the 2020 elections. As they are approaching, it's super important that everybody registers to vote. So if you haven't registered yet, you still can. And if you're not eligible to vote, you're not a citizen or you're not of age yet, you can advocate and push for other people around you, your parents, your friends, your family, anyone around you to both register to vote and to vote for the issues that matter to you. So just make sure to mobilize in your community. It's going to take all of us to push to make sure that we win on environmental justice and justice overall, and to make sure that you are all out voting in November and in your primaries that are still taking place in many places. So yeah, that's the best way to get involved, is to join us at nationalchildrenscampaign.org. And also to find out more on some of these issues that we discussed today, you can follow our podcast, which is called Our Future Now. And you can find it on any of your podcast stations on Google, Spotify, all the ones that use podcasts. So definitely check that out as well.
One thing lastly that I want to mention that Natalie, just perfectly ingrained, is that you can't be fighting for social justice without fighting for climate justice. It's the same thing. Climate justice equals social justice. And the issues that National Children's Campaigns focus on is many, like voter registration and gun violence. And you can't be fighting for those issues without fighting for climate justice. And that's the same thing around. And, it's the same, it's equal that, it's like social justice is climate justice. I just wanted to mention that, but thank you, Natalie, for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. I agree. The climate movement is an intersectional movement in every way, shape, or form. And I just want to say thank you all for being here. It was amazing talking with all.
Definitely. Thank you for hosting this, Diana. Thank you for being such a great activist here at National Children's Campaign.
Thank you, Diana.
Thanks, guys.
What a great panel to have on the second full day of National Children's Week. Learned so much from that amazing group of panelists. I talked to all those panelists earlier, and we were talking about, that's kind of like the superhero, like Avengers squad of environmental justice activists. And so it was so great that we got them all on this panel and were able to have this conversation with them. We have one more panel or a short conversation with our Your Workers, My Family team coming up in just a sec. And then directly after that, we'll be having a video performance from Antonique Smith, the amazing singer, performer, actor, and activist. So please stay tuned for that. But until then, we will be going straight to the Your Workers, My Family team. So here we go.
Hey everyone, my name is Yolian, and I am one of the members of Your Workers, My Family, and helped co-founded it with Victory here. I'd love everyone to introduce themselves really quick. I'm really excited to have this conversation about what Your Workers, My Family is.
Hi, my name is Victory Nwabufo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from Houston, but I go to school at the University of North Texas in Denton. And I helped co-found Your Workers, My Family with Yolian.
Great. My name is Caroline O'Connor, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from Portland, Maine originally, but I live in Brooklyn, New York. And I really have had an incredible opportunity to work with Yolian and Victory, who founded Your Workers, My Family back in May, and I've been part of the group ever since.
Love that. And I'm sorry I forgot to mention my pronouns are she, her, hers. So kind of the first thing that I think would be really cool to start off with is talking about what Your Workers, My Family is, and how we even, became this team that we are. And feel free for anyone to just kind of like add in your thoughts. And for me, I think it all started basically similar to most of us on Twitter. My mom is a nursing home worker and was able to organize a wildcat strike, asking for certain protections and proper payment as an essential worker. Once it was successful, I was really proud of her, and I decided to post it on Twitter to let the world know. And I had no idea it was going to be viral within a few hours, let alone a day. Then by the next day, I realized there were a lot of people that had the same experiences that only I had or my mother had. And I thought it would be really cool to use this time to help organize for the folks that maybe don't have the capacity to go on strike themselves. So that's kind of when we started just, putting a feeler out there and said, who would like to join a group? Any group, we'll make the group together. And Victory and I just decided to talk through it, and Victory came up with the Your Workers, My Family, cool name, which was nice. But yeah, that's kind of how it all started, and we were able to meet Caroline and so many other amazing members of this really great team. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to add to that on y'all's end. Cool. So a really great thing about Your Workers, My Family is that we got to become so big in a very small amount of time because of this really great org that we're all here for today. That's called National Children's Campaign. Shout out to them for working with us and for us actually becoming an initiative of theirs. It's really, really exciting to be with such an incredible team. And we're all under the same goal of wanting to make sure that we are organizing for the next generation's future, and that future, whether that it's livable through climate change, but in our case, making sure that we see workers' justice in our time and we fight for that. And I think that that's really important.
In terms of what the NCC has brought to this group, Your Workers, My Family is primarily youth-led, and one of our members, whose name is Chris, said something that was really important to me back when we first started working together. And Chris said, youth in this group gets to demand what they need from employers and what they need from corporations. And that's something that stuck with me, and something that I think the group is doing a really great job of doing. They're using social media and using the relationship with the NCC to demand that employers reach a higher standard when it comes to protecting workers, because this youth, as much as we are family members and friends with essential workers, we probably have or will be essential workers at some point in our lives. That's not to say that everybody will be, but we certainly are all going to are either in the workforce or joining the workforce. So that was really a great comment that I think Chris made, and the NCC has made it has given us some great resources as youth leaders.
Totally. Thanks for adding that. I think that's really important. And that's actually a really great segue into the next part of this, which is talking about, we know what Your Workers, My Family is. It's this advocacy group, that's providing a unique perspective within the labor movement. But what have we been up to? If anyone kind of wants to talk a little bit about that ever since we, became a group. Victory?
Yeah, so when we initially started Your Work With My Family, we started planning maybe a week before we started launching, and we decided that we would go in with a week of action in the social media campaign, where we would share essential worker stories as well as our perspective as people who are family members of essential workers, and then we spoke out against corporations who weren't fulfilling, just like making sure their workers were treated as human beings, not just working for them and like providing profit for the corporation. So we added different companies like Target, Amazon, Whole Foods, things like that, and asked them to change what they were doing to make sure that their workers were a priority. And then Caroline, if you wanted to talk about the next bit of what we're doing.
Yeah, Victory, thank you. That's exactly what we did. We all met on social media and took it upon ourselves to use social media to spread our message and to compel corporations to begin providing PPE, personal protective equipment, to essential workers, and also hazard pay. Yolian's mom led this incredible, successful wildcat strike for hazard pay in Texas at a nursing home, and we all know how much healthcare workers need PPE and hazard pay at this moment. And so again, we took to Twitter demanding that Amazon, Whole Foods, Target, and a lot of other corporations whose workers have spoken out against the really tough conditions they've been forced to work in, we really have demanded, with our own media assets that we created as a group, demanded that these companies take accountability for their workers. And we used some really damning statistics to show people exactly how dire the situation is for essential workers at these companies, but also to show people that, these companies have a lot of power, but that our voices are also very powerful in terms of holding these companies accountable. And social media is an extremely important tool, especially in a time where everybody's using it. And we've been very lucky in that we have a lot of social media partners, such as Corona Strike, Cooperation Jackson, General Strike, even like the old Occupy Wall Street social media picked us up and started retweeting, and combined, all of those social media accounts, including ours, have probably over 300,000 followers. And all those followers are made up of individuals who support workers. So if we can use social media to reach workers and their allies with our partners, that just shows how far we as a community for workers' rights can go in terms of using social media to get these corporations to do what's right and to protect their workers.
That's a really great point, Caroline, and actually a great segue into our next question, which is asking why we do focus our efforts so much via social media. Like, why do we see digital organizing as a really important tool, compared to like other forms of organizing and things like that? Anyone wants to take a stab at that?
So I think for a long time, people really downplayed how important social media activism was, including myself. Like before I was on social media, I was like, okay, these people are talking so much, but not really doing anything within if you're actually there, you see that word spreads really fast, and it's word from the people. It's not going through a news source where they filter out what they want their audience to hear and not hear. This is like real time. We are experiencing this, and we're giving you the information so you can choose what you want to do, like who you want to support, things like that. And then I also think that social media was a super important part of our campaign, just because we were in the midst, or we still are, in the midst of coronavirus. And so we couldn't do like face-to-face activism the way that people would normally do. So having it on social media just ensured that this information was accessible to everyone, and anyone who wanted to get involved could.
Yeah,
That's a really great point. Sorry, Caroline, do you want to add to that?
no, I would love to add to that. Victory, that's the point you made, especially about the lack of ability to do face-to-face organizing, I think is so crucial to understanding what Your Workers, My Family is doing. Not just what they're about, but what they're doing, what we are doing. And of course, like, it's a challenge if an organizer, if you're used to going out and working with mutual aid groups in your community, or attending in-person meetings, strategy meetings, or boilerplate messaging brainstorms in person, it can certainly be, it's been a challenge to adjust those techniques to working in COVID, during COVID. And Your Workers, My Family has done an incredible job using the tools that we have, the messaging tools that we have available to us in addition to social media, in order to do the behind the scenes back end work. Like we use like, lots of messaging tools, and those are very useful. But also social media, again, to Victory's point, social media is not only a necessity, but it's a very useful way to get our boilerplate messaging out into the world. For example, we have people on this team who use social media in a professional sense every day. Everybody has a different skill level. We have folks who understand how to study social media metrics, to understand what parts of our campaigns work best and what parts are not working best, how we're reaching different groups. We have people on our team who do that in their daily lives, and they've been generous enough to bring that to us and give us advice on how best to perform on social media. But even without going really deeply into that technical aspect of social media, just using a thread on Twitter can get so many likes and so many followers, and get people really engaged in a story. A simple tweet that starts with a statistic can really unfold within Twitter in this incredible way that gets people engaged. So using social media has been necessary, but it's also been very, very powerful to get the message across. And we've seen incredible engagement from people who across the country and across the world who we don't know personally, who have not been involved in our organization, who have emailed us with the stories of themselves or the stories of their family and what their family has been enduring as essential workers. And to wake up to an email from somebody who just thanks you for sharing their mom's story online is like very, very powerful in this moment. So that's what I got to say about social media.
I love that. Yeah, those are really great points, and I totally resonate with that. And I think kind of going off of understanding the importance of social media, I think that a lot of people would love to know what maybe y'all's or your peers or anyone that what their experience is like working during COVID, or being a family member of someone that's working during COVID. I think there's a lot to be said about the anxiety around that potentially, and just a lot of the issues in regards to knowing that this country does not provide enough protection, whether that means payment or just physical protection. So yeah, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that if y'all have anything to add.
Victor, yeah, I'll go ahead and just add my personal 2 cents when it comes to Yolian's question. My mom is she's raised me as a single mom. She also was a caregiver to her mom throughout my whole childhood. And she's always had to work. She's always been a working mom since I was a child, since I was an infant. And so I've always known, my relationship with my mom, I'm very close to my mom, but I also want to know she's protected at work. She has to work. She's beyond retirement age. in the traditional American sense, but she has to work to support herself. And that means she has to work during COVID, and she works in healthcare. And like I said earlier, healthcare workers are at high risk for going into work every day and supporting themselves and their families. So when I saw Yolian's tweet about how her mom led a strike for hazard pay, that resonates with me as the child of a working mom who works in healthcare and who was a caregiver and who works very one-on-one with people in an office setting every day, in a clinical office setting every day. And it's not enough, if we don't fight, if people like Yolian are not here to fight for and to amplify the voices of those who are fighting on the front lines of COVID, no one's going to do it for our parents. No one's going to do it, except that's why we need to do it. And we need to get our elected officials to join us in this fight. And we need to in order to make sure our parents are safe at work during COVID and beyond. So that's one element of why I'm here. And the other element is that hearing Yolian's story was really, really heartwarming to me, to know other people are caring for, concerned about their parents now. And we certainly have a lot of members in our group who are concerned about their parents at work for a lot of different reasons. And to come together, to have this opportunity to work with your workers, my family, has been more than fulfilling for me personally. And I know we're doing work that's helping working families and that's affecting communities beyond just our own.
So yeah, that was really great. And I definitely feel the same. I think that it's really interesting to see the group of people that have come together and the types of people. I think a lot of us come from working class backgrounds, and we've seen what it's like for people to have to work really hard, sometimes more than others. But I think that that's what brings this group so close, and which is why I think this topic, or not even this topic, but this issue is so close to our hearts. And so, yeah, I think I'm really excited to see kind of how this plays out even after COVID. But before we close out, I just want to ask one last question. And that's just, what's one thing that both of y'all are excited to see happen in the future for Your Workers, My Family, NCC, and beyond, in terms of what we're up to, what we're going to be doing, anything that you'd like to let people know. Victor, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm just really excited to see the change that comes out of this. This conversation is something that needed to be had a long, long time ago. But since coronavirus has brought it to the limelight, people are seeing everything that America is doing wrong, basically. So I'm really grateful to be a part of the change that will be coming for workers.
Awesome. Caroline?
Yeah, I'm very, very, very excited that we have such leaders in both Your Workers, My Family and NCC to come together with their wants and their expertise. And we're both able to get what we want because we are very much in this all hands on deck, on the ground. Like, we work very closely together to come up with our messaging. We don't have outside people influencing that, if that makes sense. So we are really, like, our possibilities are wide open. And we're going to keep them that way until we get what we want. And I'm excited. Like, that's where we're at, and that's what we're going to do. Because, like Victory said, this conversation should have happened a long time ago, and it's happening now. And we're gonna use it to our advantage.
Totally love that. I definitely agree. I think something that Your Workers, My Family can really be instrumental in is, building coalitions with other incredible orgs and people that are in it for the long haul in the labor movement. I think we're really excited to provide this unique perspective. So thank you both, Caroline and Victory, for hopping on this conversation today and introducing Your Workers, My Family to the world, to anyone watching. On behalf of NCC, thanks again. And yeah, please follow us on our social medias. We'll make sure to have that all over throughout the week. And yeah, definitely hit us up if you need anything. We would love to have anyone involved in this really great movement. So awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye, y'all.
What a great way to close out our second full day of activities for National Children's Week. So awesome to hear from Yolian, Victory, and Caroline about the amazing work that they're doing in partnership with the National Children's Campaign. Before we go, I know we have one final performance from Antonique Smith, but before we do that, I just want to plug our podcast one final time. It's called Our Future Now, and we have a new episode out on Black Lives Matter that just dropped a couple hours ago, featuring Devindale Palacio and Anthony Rogers Wright. So please check that out. I'm going to play just the first 25 seconds of it just to give you all a teaser, and then please check it out.
Our Future Now is produced by Goal 17 Media, storytellers for the common good.
But I think what he's missing is that lynching is more than a crime. It is terrorism. It is designed to instill terror in an individual and in a family and in a community in order to keep the same systems in place that have been in place since the beginning of this country, which is white supremacy.
Yeah. So that is the episode that just dropped right now. Please go check that out wherever you get your podcasts. So awesome to have these amazing guests with us for this week's episode. Give some awesome action items, including what to do for Juneteenth, which is this Friday, June 19th, which is also the day of action for the Movement for Black Lives week of action for Juneteenth. So please check all that out. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to the amazing, the wickedly talented Antonique Smith, actress, activist, all around amazing human being, and obviously, as you're about to see, amazing singer. Antonique.
I love this song that I'm about to sing because it makes me feel hopeful. We could all use a little extra hope right now. Here comes the sun, little darling. Here comes the sun, and I say it's all right. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. But here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. And I say it's all right. Little darling, smiles returning to the faces. Little darling, feels like years since it's been here. But here comes the sun, little darling. Here comes the sun. And I say it's all right. Ooh, sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I feel the ice is slowly melting. Little darling, years since it's been clear. But here comes the sun, little darling. Here comes the sun, and I say it's alright. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, sun, sun. Here it comes. And it's all right. It's gonna be all right.
That was an amazing way to close out our day today. Thank you so much to Antonique for that beautiful performance. We are so happy to have her on our team. Again, Antonique Smith, Hip Hop Caucus, Grammy-nominated singer, actress, activist, performer, all-around amazing champion for children. With that, I'm going to leave you all for today. Remember again to check out our podcast, and I will see you all tomorrow. We have an amazing set of panels on racial justice, immigration, gun violence prevention, and child welfare. So please tune in. Check our social media for all the information on that. We'll see you tomorrow. Have an amazing day, and happy National Children's Week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.